I've got Mike Rubino, who's an indoor air quality expert, 15 years of experience. He's the founder of Home Cleanse and author of The Mold Medic. Uh, and just the disclaimer, his titles and views are his own here for this meeting. He does not represent the Change the Air Foundation, where he does serve as a volunteer chair. Dr. Andrew Campbell, who's a physician and mycotoxin expert with 45 years in clinical immunology. He is a non-paid director of scientific advice for Lab, which is a testing company that does test specifically for these poisons. But he's non-paid. He does it simply because he knows and he's passionate about this work. He's been doing it for 45 years. And then also we have Dr. Larry Schwartz, who's a certified indoor and environmental consultant with over 25 years of experience. He's founder of Safe Start Environmental, and he really is a mold and SIR specialist on his staff. He does have a teacher who has lived and gone through this story, and he helps families and people understand this and really navigate through the challenges, and works closely with physicians throughout the nation to help people understand this, what real has to happen to make it safe, and help these families heal. And then finally, Mark Rataco, who's the managing partner of Respirare Labs. He's a real advocate for mold safe environments and public health innovation. And really, the only reason he went to in this business was similar story. He has his own personal story, and he's very passionate that we have to bring to light the dangers of these mycotoxins and these poisons. And he's got an innovative test that will actually measure the air and or sample the dust, and then sends it to a lab for ELISA testing to do the chemical analysis and can test for these poisons.
Molds are the part of the ecosystem of the planet. There's a million types of molds, but there's only a couple of dozen that affect humans in indoor air areas. And molds are just like plants. You get a seed in a packet, you put it in a pot with some soil and water it, and eventually something will grow out, and that something will then make seeds. Same thing with molds. They're basically dormant until they get wet and stay wet for 24 to 48 hours. And then instead of making seeds, they make spores. And these spores carry mycotoxins. And to give you an idea, human hair is 100 microns thick. Mold spores are 2 to 4 microns thick. And mycotoxins are 0.1 microns, the same size as a COVID virus. So when you're in an indoor building and it got wet, something got wet, there was a leak from the washer and dryer or behind the refrigerator or behind the stove somewhere. There's a lot of ways you can have leaks. And then mold starts growing, and as soon as it starts growing, it makes spores, and those spores carry the mycotoxins. Where do mycotoxins first go in? You breathe them in, 2 to 4 microns. They go to the deepest part of the lungs. They're absorbed into the body. The first place they go to in the brain, that's been well established in medicine and science for the last 30 years.
Yeah,
They go to the brain. What do they do in the brain? They start causing problems because these are molecular size. And as they are molecular size, they can get into the brain cells. And the first thing they do is they remove the myelin from the nerve sheath. The nerve is kind of like the wire to your computer. The wire is covered with a plastic. And the myelin, as you've heard the brain being gray matter and white matter, this is the white matter, is all myelin. So it starts destroying and eating away at that. Most common causes in children is behavior abnormalities, learning disabilities, and eventually autism. The study at Tufts University, 172 autistic children and 61 controls. The children with the autism had antibodies in their blood serum to mycotoxins The 61 controls did not. So that kind of helps define what is in autism. And then in younger people, um, Rutgers University did a study on people between the age up of 20 and up, and showed demyelination in multiple sclerosis. They said 70% of people with multiple sclerosis are the result of mycotoxins. So the most common symptoms are brain fog, fatigue, short-term memory loss, um, anxiety, depression, sleep disturbance. Um, Learning is more difficult. You have to read a paragraph twice in order to understand it. It's harder to learn new things, and it can cause also skin issues, the most common one being eczema.
Yeah.
And those are the top, I'd say, problems with not only children, but adults. Now, a sport trap tells you what is going on in that room at that moment. Half an hour later, after somebody shuts and opens a door or window or walks through there, it'll change it.
Yeah. How about, I mean, Larry, from your experience, or Mike?
So on spore trap testing, besides what the doctor is saying, um, the testing that's typically done in schools is done in a non-ambient situation when there's no activity going on in the classroom. And uh, the spore levels are going to be dramatically reduced than when you have an active classroom full of kids and a teacher. So the testing isn't done at the right time. Like the doctor says, it only gives us a snapshot in time of what's going on in that 5 minutes you're gathering air. The results are what we call non-viable. The spores are not alive. They're only dead spores that show up. And it doesn't count any of the incredible thousands of microscopic mold parts that are not spores that carry mycotoxins on them. Does not give us any information as to where reservoirs might be. It might give us some idea of some areas that need further investigation to find where reservoirs may be, but it doesn't get us to the species level. It gives us the genus, like the family name of the mold, and testing needs to get to a species level because each species correlates with specific chemicals they create at the time they're metabolizing and growing. And those chemicals go airborne with these chemicals, which then are called mycotoxins, that can attach to walls, dust, structure, and content. Many times I have clients say, I don't see any mold in my home or classroom, but how can tests show it's there? I don't see anything. Because even if the mold grew a year ago or 5 years ago or currently, these residual chemical contaminants from mycotoxins remain that get disturbed in the air that can affect the client, the patient, the children. So the type of testing has to be totally appropriate to get, an idea of what the risks are in the classroom or any indoor built environment.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you have an ongoing leak for an undetermined amount of time, the risk factor jumps up incrementally. So I think it's really important to do a proper inspection, a thorough inspection. That, and something to add on to what Larry said and what Andrew said is that when you're collecting a spore trap, you're getting 75 liters of air, right? I mean, in a 2,000 square foot space, you've got 4.5 million liters of air, assuming it's 8 foot ceilings, right? And so when you put it into that perspective, you're analyzing 1 grain of sand across an entire beach and saying that that entire beach is clean just off of 1 grain of sand. And so I think it's just important to add that onto that.
And one of the frustration things I had as the owner of that company, I would have homeowners that no matter what we did, we couldn't make that home safe for them. There was something left behind that we couldn't detect. We passed all their traditional mold tests out there. We passed all the additional ones, VLC canister test, you name it. We tested it. There wasn't anything there. The only option for those individuals at that time was to basically relocate so that they weren't being exposed in that environment. Now that we have a test, we can actually sample the indoor air and determine what the levels of mycotoxins are in the air. And we use what we call an IOM sampler. The IOM sampler was designed by the Institute of Occupational Medicine. It's used extensively to measure workers' exposure to bioaerosols, chemicals, and particulates in the workplace. A worker would basically put it on with a manual pump at the start of their shift. At the end of the shift, they would turn it in and it would be submitted to the lab and evaluated. This is the same device that we're using to test your indoor air. So for we're putting it on a tripod in the middle of the room under active sampling to get a valid sample. This sample collection method actually meets an industry standard, not only internationally, but also a US standard for collecting a sample. It's one of the only tests out there for mold or mycotoxins that uses an industry standard to collect the sample to be evaluated. Once we have that sample, we will run ELISA testing on it. For those of you who don't know what ELISA is, ELISA's been around for 50 years detecting mycotoxins in our food. So it's a proven technology. So when Patrick came to us and he was concerned about his son having mycotoxins exposure in his home, we came up with an innovative way for him, it's a special pump, to basically put it in his backpack, um, turn it on when he was in the classroom, and collect a sample. Now, I'm sure Michael and Larry and would never say that that is a way that we should test a school, but at least gave us some data so that Patrick can make a decision regarding his son. And it came back very high with trichosanes, so he was able to pull his son from that school, and his son got better. So we have this tool now that we did not have back in 22 when I owned my business. And the industry as a whole, and Michael can also understand this, the industry as a whole isn't doing a lot of training on mycotoxins, mycotoxin remediation for remediation contractors or even inspectors. That's starting to change because of we now have a test to test the air. There are organizations like Normie that are putting together very sophisticated training programs and certifications for their IEP. So the industry started to recognize this.
You have to understand that basically everyone's immune system is unique and different. So you could, and actually, we did a study on 119 people all in the same place, and you get differences. Now, everybody here knows of a couple who go somewhere, they catch the flu, and one of them's well in 2 days, the other one's sick in bed for a week. It's the same flu. So
Yeah.
everybody responds differently because of everyone's immune system being unique and different. Uh,
Yeah, I'm going to defer that to Michael because Michael deals a little bit probably more with the big schools than I do. My experience with schools is I could never even get in there to do a spore trap sampling. They didn't want to do any kind of testing for, I believe, liability reasons. But Michael, I'm going to let you take that one.
I mean, I can only be theoretical in nature here, but my theory is that I believe that unfortunately a lot of professionals out there don't actually believe that mold makes people sick. And I think that's part of the misinformation that exists out there, and that's because for many years it really was taught incorrectly. I mean, when I was growing up, you put bleach on it, you painted over it. You didn't tear it out. There was none of that. Remediation protocols are pretty new. Remediating thoroughly and wearing Tyvek and wearing mask and protecting yourself. This is all very new. And so you just have to think about it from that perspective. I think there's been a lot of misinformation and damage that has impacted people. And then you also have IEPs that they work for the schools, they work for builders. That's their bread and butter, and so their job is to defend those people, just like if you hired an attorney, right? And an attorney you would hire to defend you. And so, yeah, it's not an ideal system for sure. And there's a lot of misinterpretation of what things actually mean. But the tide is changing, and I think that's the good news.
If a child's been well and they start getting headaches, their grades start going down. They're not feeling well. They're tired all the time. They were great at sports and now they don't want to participate because they're too tired. All those things. I mean, mycotoxins affect hormones. Mycotoxins affect all types of thyroid, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So they create a lot of illness, and with the illness comes a lot of symptoms. Now, some will have more of this type of symptoms, and some will have more different ones. It's not universally everybody has this one symptom, except for, I would say, fatigue, um, brain fog, headaches, unusual symptoms that that person did not have previously. So let's say a kid is uh, in sports, good student, etc., and then their grade starts to go down. Their sports they don't do so well in sports, etc., etc. I have parents who go and have the kids checked for drugs first, and then they take them to this doctor, that doctor, and all they get treated for is symptoms. Then finally they end up with me.
Let me ask Michael a question there, Patrick. Uh, Michael, could we do some kind of analysis like a sick building on the school, which goes into a little bit more detail and gets more information?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, yeah, it's a bit bewildering to me when you start to see a pattern of people getting sick, and it makes you start to wonder, what about all the other people that might be sick but might not be attributing it to the school, right? That's the thing that always comes across my mind. Yeah, I think it's hard, Patrick. There's no set standard of how many people need to be sick in a building before they deem the building sick. I think it's on a case by case basis. There's really no set standards for how much mold can be in a building to begin with, right? And so that's what makes this very tricky. But I think it's about having awareness, right? As more people are aware of this problem in this school, which you've done a fantastic job, making people aware of this. Obviously everybody here that's on this call today is aware of this issue, and that's why we're on this call, right? And so I think when we look at it from this perspective, you need more monitoring, and you need to just continue to push to hold the school accountable. Um, yeah, I think we talked a little bit about different tools in the tool belt, right? So speaking of the ERMI, now the ERMI itself and the scoring mechanism of that, totally. I mean, it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. It's totally a research tool. But the mechanism behind it, the MSQ-PCR, it is a data DNA specific analysis, right? So that is a valid tool in the tool belt. Right? We have air testing. Now, air testing, we talked about it earlier. One grain of sand, comparing that against an entire beach, not always the smartest mechanism, right? But there, if it's done properly and you really do it in a targeted fashion, could be pretty useful. Obviously, the mycotoxin air testing, which is by the way revolutionary, where this is another tool in the tool belt. And so as we utilize these tools, we start to see that we have some sick kids coming forward. We've got mycotoxin presence, right? We have a history of water damage, right? Typically when something walks like a duck and it talks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And so I don't know how many other points you wanna to really to bring up, but for me, the reason I'm here is because from what I see, you've already have the makings of a pretty strong case around, um, you know, potential issues inside this school that's affecting kids.
But we've done a lot of school work like that. And ideally, if there's time at the end, I think it would be very valuable to all of you to hear a couple of the little short stories Michelle Fisher has of what happened in her school.
Oh gosh, sure. Thank you. This has been really a great group coming together, and I'm very passionate about this topic. I spent 27 years in education, was the head of our reading department, thought I had a good relationship with administration, and that all changed once I asked the question. I had been sick and couldn't figure out. I went for years trying to figure out what was going on, and my office flooded the year previous. And typical to most schools, this was a school built in 1972. The same carpet remained from 1972, but typical to many schools, custodians are brought in, and that's who's doing the cleanup. They bring in fans and dry things out, and so forth. So, to make a really long story short, I requested testing. Specifically, I wanted qPCR testing. I was told qPCR testing would be done, and spore trap air testing was done instead at 6 o'clock in the morning on a non-attendance day. Now, there was mold growing in ceiling tiles, visible mold growing in books. It was visible throughout the building. And yet they relied on this one test that was taken when no students or staff were present, and said the building is safe. Now, 2 staff members were diagnosed with SIRS. We were made a mockery of by the administration. I had to put in FOIA requests to release the data from the testing. I went as far as contacting OSHA, the EPA. When I went through OSHA, because they were the ones who required this testing be done, I said, can you make them retest at least so that the testing is representative of when students and staff are in the building? And their response was, well, no, it doesn't make a difference when we test. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, because there's no threshold, there's no guidance that says what's safe or unsafe. So if OSHA is requiring that, you know, firms come in and do this testing, and there's no standard, no guideline to say what's safe or unsafe, you are creating this false sense of for everyone, because we were tested, and then a letter went out and said everything's fine. But that's not really the case. There isn't any threshold to determine what is safe or unsafe. And the fact that we had mold growing in students' books says it's unsafe. So I was on a leave of absence for 2 years. Things became really contentious. This was in 2016. Obviously, was not able to return. I should have retired from teaching this year, but I've now stepped into a new role, and I do believe I'm just as passionate about what it is that we do at Safe Start Environmental. There's so many people who are affected, so many teachers, so many children, and I wanted to put. Somebody asked the question of how many kids or how many people have to be sick. I think that we as Americans in America, we live in such a toxic time that we are accepting so many of these chronic illnesses as the norm. Oh, they have ADHD. Oh, they have, an autoimmune. Oh, and we accept all of that as becoming our normal. And it's not. It's not. I mean, it's not normal for the human body to be suffering this way. So my daughter wound up with this illness. Her school was also affected. Teachers, when I started bringing up that at her school, started talking about, we've been concerned about this for years. Teachers have died of cancer, heart disease. We believe this is a sick building. Bring it to their administration. And I was kind of met with the same, hand in my face as I was at my own school. So it's very frustrating. I took it as far as I could in the legal process. Um, I was ultimately dismissed from my position because I refused to come back to work, even though my physician was saying these are the accommodations that need to be met. We need to have it tested properly, to which the superintendent responded and said, no, school needed to be tested now or ever, as far as she was concerned. So,
It's it's
yeah.
yeah.
But
It's I mean, thank you for sharing your story because you're a teacher and here's the administration fighting you tooth and nail, denying and saying, "No, it's
yeah.
not us, it's you." And every
And
one of these families that I've worked with, that's what the response is. And I know if you know the most recent stories, they even our district even spent $31,000 to just say, no, I'm not going to let you go to a school that your daughter actually has gone in and doesn't have problems in that school,
oh,
versus here and for what to just have. I don't know. I'm just completely at a loss. I
well,
do have another. Michelle, I know you and I connected a long time ago, and it
we
brings me
did a
to
while.
tears.
It's good to see.
Again, hearing your story and another comment in here about that his daughter has been consistently sick since January 25 through April 25, missed a lot of school, seen the doctor 4 to 5 times during this period, and it's just bringing me to tears too because literally our son was perfectly fine. 5 years he went to Country Meadows until he wasn't. And I don't know if it's because over the period of time the exposure just consistently there. He's fighting it the whole time, and one day it was just too much. And I don't know if that's something that you see where it can either be progressive or it can be all of a sudden, oh my gosh, why is my kid sick all the time? And so I'm just floored that it's still allowed to be happening, and that's the reason I still continue to speak out is because every time another parent reaches out, because of our story now, because of the Strzelecki's family, there's more families that are out there that are trying to figure this out with their kids, and I'm hoping that this comes to light that there is an issue. You go to a different